Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. We've mentioned many times the benefits of reading RFCs to learn about dusty corners, ambiguous requirements, and weird states that lead to vulnerabilities. The catch is that lots of them are long and boring. But there are also some fun RFCs out there, ones that propose outright silly things like evil bits, carrier pigeons, and IPv6. Which means this week we do something foolish and chat with some of the Security Weekly crew about the worst ways to embrace Appsec. Read some errata and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show to learn the latest tools and techniques to understand DevOps, applications, and the cloud. Your trusted source for the latest AppSec news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. This is episode 324, recorded March 31st, 2025, which is coincidentally one day before April Fool's. So we'll find out who the fools really are, though, once we get to the end of this episode. I am your host, as usual, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella. John, it has been a while. It's good to see you.
I know, you asked for some errata, and here I am.
The man knows his purpose in life. This is wonderful. We also have some ASW folks hanging out with us. Jackie McGuire. Hello, Jackie.
Hello. Thank you for having me. It's early, so be gentle.
We'll do what we can. It's AppSec. It's a dangerous territory we're heading into. But to help us out, we also have Adrian Sanabria. Hello, Adrian.
Hey there. How's it going?
It's going quite well. And we have Jeffrey Goldberg, who is... Hold on, wait. Nope, somebody added that guy. We'll take him off in a second. While we're taking him out of our chat, there's one announcement. Security Weekly listeners save $100 on their RSAC conference, which is RSAC Conference 2025 full conference pass. We'll fix that typo. It takes place April 28th to May 1st in San Francisco and on demand. To register using our discount code, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC25 and use the code 5U5 SecWeekly. We hope to see you there. So, folks, glad you're joining us, because at the end of April is not only RSA, but we on ASW are going to be recording a live episode at B-Sides SF on that Saturday, April 26th. So come say hi, join in. It's going to be fun. Adrian's going to be there too. Adrian, do you want to give a quick shout out, maybe?
Yeah.
For your
not
own
at the live
B-Sides.
recording. Yeah, but
not at the live recording. You've got your own work cut out for you.
Yeah, I will be speaking the next day. I think they moved it to noon, so it's now noon on Sunday, April 7th. And yeah, I like the theme that they had, so I went all in on it. And the title of my talk is "Preparing for Dragons: Don't Sharpen Swords, Set Traps, Gather Supplies." And it's a message of resilience over getting overly focused on adversaries, and I don't know. It just seems like a lot of the, like we have this whole mythology going on in cybersecurity around attackers, and we give them cool names and build cool artwork around it and stuff like that. And it's we're not heroes, we're not dragon slayers, so. The message is survival, not defeating the dragon.
So a little bit more of Hallmark movie than Dungeons and Dragons movie, I suppose. A message of resilience.
I don't know about, more like survival horror. I don't know about Hallmark.
Oh, okay. This is good. Yeah. In that case, then, yeah, there's a bunch of horror movies that we'll get to at the end here.
IT and InfoSec is survival horror. It's Resident Evil.
There we go. Yeah, Resident Evil, head out to the desert. There's a movie called Severance as well, for those of you who enjoy the show. Completely unrelated, but it's a office trip gone wrong. But as we riff on these, one of the things that I was riffing on, trying to prepare for myself for the wonderful theme of dragons at B-Sides, a lot of ideas I came up with felt like this is probably a bad idea, or this isn't a good idea, or this just would not work as an AppSec presentation. So I wanted to invite some friends to help me flesh out what would the worst application security conference program look like? And I don't know if I need to seed some ideas or that you've already got some of your own about what presentation would you just be cringing either to propose yourself or if you had to sit through because it's just so bad.
I've sat through a few that sounded like the speaker had studied Ben Stein. So
we can talk about the delivery.
Monotonous, almost to the point that it was like ASMR for speaking, and I have ADHD, so when somebody takes an extended period of time to make a point, I want to die.
I really don't want to see Appsec ASMR.
It might put you to sleep really quickly.
It sounds a little weird.
It does. And so one of the things is that, not only has AI stolen a lot of our work, our artwork and written work, it's also, for me at least, stolen a lot of joy because it feels harder and harder to satirize LLM hype. I had a list of things, but I wasn't sure how much of them within the next 6 months would just be indistinguishable from reality. But we've got vibe coding, of course. So I don't know if there's a vibe coding topic that, what exactly would vibe Appsec coding look like? And there's your answer, everyone. Silence. No one wants to touch that because there's too much emptiness there.
Yeah. I suppose it's job security is what it would look like for everybody who works in application security.
There is. Here's just some code. Who knows how it got put together? Who knows how it's going to be taken apart? Because there's going to be some very expensive bug bounties that are coming out of that. But
Adrian, I interrupted you like 3 times.
Yeah, no, I was just going to mention that we just closed a CFP for B-Sides Knoxville. So I literally have examples of bad submissions that we rejected for that conference. I don't want to call out anybody specifically, but yeah, it's I hate the vague ones, the ones that are like how to SDLC, right? Where it's and I think the ones that annoy me the most are the ones that don't take real life into account. Like there's a lot of topics that are like I don't know. You just need to patch. You just need to you just need to like you see these submissions or these talks and you think, have you ever worked in any kind of field in the industry? Because that's not how any of this works. Like it just everything you're suggesting is going to fail on day one.
There's definitely there's that category of apps that are talks that are sort of like, I did this one thing that worked for me, and there's no way you're going to be able to repeat this on your own. So it's sort of
Well, you work at Google, so none of what you're talking about applies to me.
Yeah, I think there's like some, I don't know if it's benefit of the doubt or just willful ignorance because of how sad the state of most even large enterprises are. Oh goodness, my English teacher would hit me. But there's definitely a degree of like, here's how to build the ultimate security fortress. It's like, yeah, if I was going to burn this whole thing to the ground, be non-operational for 3 months and rebuild it from the ground up, that could be the case. But I think we were talking about Windows Vista a couple weeks ago, and that you're still finding it. Like every now and then you pull open the hood of something and you're like, oh, this still exists. We were talking about the Napster acquisition on ASW. I'm like, I wonder what's in that tech stack. I want to know what's in Napster's tech stack. I really do.
That's going to be 20-year-old code that somebody's going to come up with, like how I used AI to rewrite more bugs. And it's, But one of those things there is like, we're building our fortress. I have mixed feeling. I always resist like metaphors we end up talking more about the metaphor than the actual security topic. But I have like this mixed feeling of, I want to do a presentation on metaphors, but then that feels like it would just go sideways. Like, Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra. One, where are my techie Trek friends who are going to even know what I'm talking about?
Right.
But
you need at least,
you
need more than one person in the audience to get the reference, right?
I know.
Well, then we can't understand why the industry feels so daunting and impenetrable to people outside it. Yeah. So I think that's another thing, is that there's also this level of assumed knowledge in some technical submissions that, like, I don't know if you've ever actually worked with people in a SOC, but they're not all, 94-letter acronym computer science PhDs. And while I think you're rabbit holing about whatever it is great, it needs to be accessible at some level.
But I've actually seen the opposite of that too, where if you have like a head of marketing or some sort of marketing person somehow manages to get in and give a talk, and they're not technical at all, and they are very into modern what's going on in the world around us, so they keep making either like TV references or Kanye jokes or something that's like completely not related to tech at all. And some of the people in the room will be like, I've got no idea what that person's talking about.
Yeah.
I once gave a keynote at Virus Bulletin in, I think it was in Denver, Colorado that year. It moves around every year. One of the oldest conferences out there. I think it's like 40 years old at this point. And my keynote was just chock full of Star Wars references. And I look out at this crowd, and it's like all Eastern Europeans and Asians, and like nobody's laughing at any of the jokes, except for like one British guy. There's like one British guy out there, and I just latched onto him. Like I looked at him the whole presentation, and just told myself, "This is going well. This is going well."
Oh God.
Yeah, I actually did that at RSA last year. So we did my friend Zach and I did a talk at the Dark Arts Village. It was a great talk. It was about how to get security teams, like how to get AI projects to work with security teams earlier, and different exploits security teams should be concerned about. But we had an early slide that was like, security has to work with all the other teams in an organization when they get along, and when they don't. And in the one they don't, we had a picture of Kendrick Lamar and Drake shaking hands. And I thought it was going to kill, because Zach's in his 20s and I'm an overgrown 15-year-old. And it was like crickets across this like upper middle-aged white dude audience. And I was just like, oh boy.
Wrong audience.
Yeah. So yes, knowing your audience is probably key.
It is, and it's funny because there was in the late 90s, there was so many presentations where like, here's a Sun Tzu quote, here's how Sun Tzu and Appsec, Sun Tzu and this. And then everybody discovered Clausewitz, and it's perfectly fine if your eyes are glazing over right now. But Clausewitz was the next like war themed, that everybody wanted to use with their metaphors. Thankfully, at least we jumped into memes. But to Jackie's point, like, we need a top 10 list. We need an OWASP of here are the memes to use for your audience based on what generation they are. It could be Gen AI or Gen X, but that's the top 10 list that we need. John, it's going to get worse because we also need a top 10 list of what emojis to use in your LinkedIn post to get the most engagement.
Oh, there you go.
Oh my God.
How about none?
4 things my annual exam taught me about B2B sales. And you need the pointing down, and then you need some type of random ass emoji. And like, you think people don't know that's AI generated? You have periods at the end of your bullet points. Get out of here. Like,
Yeah.
Let me explain. I'll clarify, like all these phrases that are just like, oh wow, that's just so boring. As we talk about programs, presentations here, also like I worry about what's the worst keynote that could be possible. And I'm just waiting for the first Appsec or InfoSec conference to have a keynote written by and delivered by an LLM. And the prompt is just going to be, what is Appsec? Or something like that. And it's going to be the most inane, generic, boring thing that possibly won't be ASMR, but it's going to put Jackie to sleep and drive her crazy for some other reason,
but
I'm sure.
You know what'd be a really fun one to do, though, is have it seem like that, but actually have a person behind that's just like cranking out more and more obnoxious things just to see how long people put up with it.
That's true. The best, the best Turing test ever.
Yes.
Is this a human or an LLM? There's also things like, there's themes, and here's where what's the worst direction to shift security. So here, let me just, we've got a panel here. I go through worst direction to shift. Would you shift left? Would you shift right? Would you shift left, right? Would you shift up, up, down, down, left, right, BA? Okay, I think I've got the answer there. Just
I'll give you a serious
response.
answer on that one, though. Is companies that shift in other words, they're like, oh, we know how we're going to do this thing. We're going to ignore the rest of the world. And they just sort of, come back into their little world and, oh, we're secure for that. We don't need to patch that type of thing.
Oh, yes. And I think part of the reason too, want to pick on things like shifting is just, it's kind of implying we're going to do the same thing that hasn't been working for the last 20 years, and we're going to do it over here instead. And that just is one of those things that drive me crazy. That's like, we have all these other myths as well about public Wi-Fi and things that Appsec already struggles with. And now we're building on other things about just where to continue to fail doing Appsec well.
I sort of wonder if it started with the good old marketing department again, from the point of view of they need to figure out how do we know people understand what shift left is because we spent a ton of money on that last year, but now we want to change or make ourselves differentiated from that other startup. How can we say that we're doing something but not that? And like, oh, well, we're shift right. And I don't know if that's sort of partially where that came from, or...
It feels like we need to, like, where's our audience for selling for this solution? Because it's not necessarily the Appsec team that might not be the ones that are doing the code. So I can kind of acknowledge that, but I think we just need to find some better aspects there. Makes me think. Oh,
a lot of these terms just feel like three bros in Patagonia vests around a table at Pete's, and one of them says it, and the other ones are like, "Yes, bro, yes," but like. This is not something that you're going to be able to explain to real people. Like, what does shift mean? Because in a car, shifting is very abrupt. In if we're talking about like in sands of time, like in geoplate, if we're talking about tectonic plates, those things shift very slowly. And so it's this very like murky, non-defined thing. And if you can't explain it within the enterprise, getting everybody on board, getting budget, explain to me what shifting anything has to do with revenue, and I'll show you where it can succeed. But until you tie it to some term that to the CEO and CFO means more revenue, it's not going to work. And so I don't know, just some of these things feel like they seemed like a really good idea when you were a little bit stoned and caffeinated, but nobody ever actually had to do anything within an enterprise to make them work. I think that's that kind of disconnection, is
I think one of the biggest issues. I'm giving a webinar on quantum encryption and post-quantum crypto and everything, and I shared a few slides of it on Mastodon, and somebody from Google said, "Oh my God, please don't do this," because I'm basically saying, it's mostly hype. It's because I'm a big picture guy, right? Like you've got these Eternal Blue isn't patched. You still have SQL injection. You've got. I regularly talk to companies that have just run their first vulnerability scan ever. 40, 60-year-old companies, and reality is very different. From some of the stuff that we see being pitched, and I feel like it's just a complete. Of course, the person saying, no, this is actually really important. It's not a theoretical threat, the breaking of encryption. We've never seen a breach where somebody's like, oh, yeah, I'm going to use Poodle on this one. I'm going to, they're vulnerable to Poodle.
Beast sounds cooler. Let's use Beast.
Yeah. I mean, but at the same time, it worries me because... like a strong foundation in cryptography is still pretty freaking important. It feels like you can't just ignore it altogether, but I can't come up with any real risks that should make you want to have to do that. So,
it goes back to money. So how many attackers can once quantum, how much does it cost to run a quantum identity attack at scale? How many attackers have access to that attack? And what's the likelihood that my enterprise is going to get hit by that attack? Because until that is all higher than the cost of implementing enterprise post crypto. It's one of those things that is great to sell on. It's fear is great. It makes for quick sales, but I don't know that the reality of it is
the attack is never going to happen. But do we just ignore crypto standards, right? Do we just never? We just is the message tech debt is fine? Right?
And that's where, it's like it's choosing the audience. When is it appropriate, or where is it appropriate to have the conversation where it's going to affect change, or is it just educational? Because we also, even I think it was last week, I just covered very briefly a group out of the CCC, Chaos Computer Club, who's working on the Flippy RAM project, who were talking about Rowhammer. And they're kind of pointing out, oh, look, Rowhammer is really cool. Like, I think it was even some Google researchers that showed how to do Rowhammer style attacks purely in JavaScript. But, and there's the long pause, but we can't make the pause too long because, this is audio. This is, if you haven't done what Adrian mentioned, the basics of the SQL injection, you've run your vulnerability scan, you've done XYZ, even just rolling out FIDO keys for your developers, worrying about Flippy, worrying about Rowhammer, worrying about post-quantum attacks is absolutely the bottom of your list. Fun, they can be good intellectual exercises, but wow, very divorced from here's what practical Appsec needs in 2025.
And I think it just comes back to what Jackie's talking about, like the availability of resources, like the list of absolutely critical things to do in InfoSec is much longer than the resources available to do it. So it's I like to say, yeah, sure, post-quantum encryption or crypto updates, that's on the list of critical things to do, but it's number 37, and we have the resources to do, 1 through 6.
Yeah.
So it's going to get pushed.
BYOD, that's probably not the highest thing on the list. Like maybe deploying one of the solutions that actually scans mobile devices for vulnerabilities before letting them single sign on would be better. And there's also in the enterprise this weird level of relative risk, in that the risk you can see is scarier than the risk you can't, because as an enterprise, you can be bulletproof. You can get to all of these things. If you are not also holding your vendors and contractors accountable for all of these things, it doesn't matter. If you're letting them take sensitive data and store it in their organization, if you're not also making sure that they adhere to every single standard you have also implemented, it doesn't matter. And so I think there's a willful ignorance to third-party risk, in that it's a lot harder to quantify, and it's also a lot harder to enforce the statements of work, the SOC 2 validation, the third part, it's expensive. And so we just pretend that it doesn't exist because we can, get a thumbs up on our annual performance report for addressing internal risk, but that shit's a lot harder to get at.
And it points out very directly to things like the old school by now, SSO.tax site that's just been tracking, if you're working with a third party, can they even support the SSO that you have for your own stack? Let alone just getting that idea of how are they handling this data? How are you tracking this data? It reminds me of the idea of how to be less helpful with advice of threat modeling. Start with your data flow diagram, and quite often there's crickets because nobody has a data flow diagram.
Right.
Nobody has one that's even correct. And even that data flow diagram doesn't necessarily have trust boundaries on it, which maybe that's where you need to do the threat modeling exercise for. But yeah, just good luck with that sort of vibe threat modeling. It's just kind of well, what you doing, man? You got some data?
This feels
what's
important.
Going on? This feels important. Yeah. This feels like we should do something. What should we do?
I think just checking there. You gave me an idea, so I had to go look. The domain name quantum.tax is available for sale for $25,000 if anyone's interested.
$25,000. Oh, wow.
That domain broker is going to make a big
I want my cut
on that.
I think every talk should have a how slide in it. How do I sell this to my developers? How do I sell this to management? It seems like a lot of talks, are trying to convince you that something's important, that you should care about something, that you should do something. But very few of them give you any kind of advice on like, okay, like here's how I got, my dev team to actually do something. Here's how I actually got, like it all kind of stops short of that. It's like, here's 37 things on your list. Here's number 38 for you, right? Like how do you move it up? In terms of priority, or should you even move it up?
It's not intuitive. I spend my days talking to vendors in security because I'm a research analyst, and every single vendor I talk to, I go to their website and I get to the call and I'm like, where is the 100,000 foot view? Where is the explain this product to me like I'm 5 so that I can explain it to my CEO in business terms, not security terms, because the things that I take for granted, they don't. And I'm sure Adrian's sick of hearing me talk about this, but like all this year, like the thing I'm wearing out is CISO enablement. Like stop assuming CISOs can take something that they're really familiar with and completely retranslate that as financial risk to a CFO, completely retranslate it as enterprise risk to a CEO, then to the CTO, explain to them why this, impacts uptimes. And like, you have to be hyper empathetic and like look at what 10 different people care about and kind of be a marketer and tie what you're doing to that. And it's just not something. I'm autistic in that way. Not all CISOs are autistic in that way. They're autistic in other ways that are super beneficial, but just I think there's a lot of that we take for granted. And it's a really, really hard thing to get right as a marketer, because you usually have people that come from a marketing background or a product background. And to be able to marry those two into something that's more educational, that's why I made the big bucks, but it's also really difficult.
And there's a subtext of what I was trying to have fun with this type of segment is that communication aspect. And Jackie just laid out a really good example of that. Adrian, his house slide, is another good example. I will begrudgingly admit there was a while where RSA conference said you have to use our template and the last slide of your presentation has to be apply, which synonymous there, semantic relation. But the thing I wanted to add to what Jackie was talking about is that what bugs me are those overwrought metaphors that haven't been thought through. And what exactly do you mean by that? You might be implying the wrong thing, as well as just saying like, oh, well, what's the worst CVSS score? Or just using pure Appsec language because nobody really cares. Internally, it might be helpful, but this is a CVSS 8.9 versus a 9.1. How is this, a 2 decimal points of difference? Does that mean we should fix it 2 hours faster? Does that mean we should fix it on a Tuesday instead of a Monday? Help me out here. That's
scores are dumb.
Scores are dumb, but everybody wants quantification, not quantum, but quantification. This is, is my risk a 9 or a 10? Am I driving it down? These types of things. And that I think is one of those hard aspects, honestly, to push back to. Here's how to qualitatively talk about it.
Metrics are tough. Yeah.
And
useful metrics. Yeah.
Useful metrics. And that's where I would also say to pick on the vuln side of things, because one of the things I've been trying to do on the show is not just equate Appsec with vulnerability management. It's an easy metric to say, this is how many vulns we found. This is how many vulns we fixed. But if you're just chasing those CVEs, you're burning everybody out. Like, why are you even bothering? That's just, there's no strategy there. And that's not interesting to have that, to explain to the CFO or CTO or anybody else outside of, the Appsec team, perhaps.
I'm sort of curious to test the temperature of the room on one metric that this seemed like it was fairly popular a few years ago. I'm not sure if it still is, but what about when you're seeing your vulnerability report and then the vendor puts in there how you compare to other companies in that same industry?
Yeah.
No sound.
I think without a sophisticated measurement that adjusts for a whole bunch of variables, it's mostly just I think what I have found most shocking in being a research analyst working in security is the extent to which most statistics are, there's already an assumption going into the study that's just being confirmed. And so, I think that if you try to generalize things, and one of the things we've talked about repeatedly here on all of the Security Weekly episodes is that no two tech stacks are the same. Mm-hmm. And that's the issue, is that you cannot, if this were, we were talking about cars, if there were only 10 manufacturers with 5 models each, it would be a lot easier. But there are hundreds of manufacturers with thousands of pieces of software and tools and firmware, and just, you can't, scores are bullshit. I think we just like, that's my opinion. Very uneducated, but I just, as a data scientist, there are a million things you would have to adjust for, right? Like size of the code base, open source versus private. It just, I don't know. I think
And one of the things they're doing too is also, like, I'll throw in that the other terrible metaphor that I always hear is, I don't have to outrun the bear, I just have to outrun you. And that kind of is where that, how do I compare against others? Am I doing better than them?
Yeah.
That just falls apart because scanning is cheap. Exploiting is cheap. Running ransomware is just cheap. You can go, you suddenly don't have one bear that's chasing you. You have 1,000 script kiddies with 1,000 bears chasing everybody. So that's where those comparative scores fall apart for me too. And I really wish, how do you compare against doing some basics that the industry thinks are pretty good? And here is where I'll go back to things like, you got FIDO, you got, phishing resistant passkeys, things like that, and maybe something else to throw on that list. I'm running out of list ideas, so Adrian, you're going to have to take over.
Yeah, I think people need something to compare against, though, and people do love scores. It's just I'm not sure your neighbor is the right thing to compare against too. Something I urge a lot of folks is to take bad things that have happened to other companies, maybe your company, and measure yourself against that. How would you do against this particular breach? Take a breach and would you detect that attack? Would you stop that? Do you have the same vulnerabilities that the bears, the script kiddies are looking for? And I think that matters more than how your neighbor's doing, because we do know that it's an environment where there's actually not enough attackers to take advantage of all the vulnerable companies out there. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit left on the table. And so it's less running faster than just knowing if you've crossed that bar or not, if you pass that bar. Because like a lot of it is... we're talking about patching things and fixing security vulnerabilities, but just stealing credentials is how most of these things start. And they are targeting Macs. They're targeting developer machines. Info stealers on Macs are very popular right now. And you got to be aware of that. And you got to be prepared for that kind of stuff to happen. It's the attack is going to come from one of your AWS keys and one of your API keys, and if you're not looking for it, you're going to miss it because it's just going to look like, developer activity.
It points
from
down
a data-driven decision-making standpoint, as a financial advisor for 4 years up to the financial crisis and then 10 years after it, and I think that a lot of times comparing yourself to other, I think the best way to measure is against yourself, right? So progress, and because progress should be incremental. And oftentimes what you see is that a vendor will come in and tell a customer like, oh, you're here, you need to be all the way over there. And you need to buy all these products because you need to be all the way over there. Not, hey, you're right here. The next best decision for you to make, the next 1 or 2 things that you should do is this, just to get you a little bit further. And so, I love the idea of developing a maturity target for yourself, assess where you're at, assess where you want to go, and then figure out what progress you've made towards that. But when trying to get people to make good financial decisions after the financial crisis, the first thing we would discuss is they would say, oh, well, my sister has $500,000 in her 401k, or my brother-in-law made $1 million on AMD stock and he's set for life. And I feel so far behind because I've only got 50 grand. And getting them to step out of that, all these random data points with no context to, okay, this is my situation. This is the next best decision I can make. And to separate that from what's happened in the past. Because that's the other thing is like once bitten, twice shy. A lot of times, we know half of SIM stand-ups fail, right? So if you had a SIM stand-up fail, it's really hard to say, okay, put that in a vacuum. Now let's look at what's going to make this one different. So just from a psychology and good decision-making standpoint, comparing yourself to other people without context, because your other CISO friends will not tell you about the stuff they fuck up. They're going to tell you about the wins they had, like, oh, we caught these PRC hackers before they could even get in because we were so on top of our DNS. Not like, oh, but then our CFO actually got ransomwared because he's an idiot. Like, nobody ever tells you those things, right? So also keep in mind that the good stuff that you hear is in a vacuum.
No, and I think I love this conversation because for me, it's highlighting Appsec is more than just fixing a bunch of vulns. And if you ignore the financial aspects of it, or just where the time is spent, it goes back a little bit to that conversation about what does shifting even mean? What are we shifting? These are the conversations to have. And we haven't even touched on things like secure design, secure defaults, things that are related to code, but we just got vibes for that these days. So I don't even think we need to worry about that. But we'll start to close down this segment and get into the news. But I think, Adrian, you had something else that you wanted to chime in with, it looked like.
Well, you just said it, but I was going to mention secure by design, and the kind of some of the problems I have with that, in that, again, there's no house side there with secure by design. There's how are you competitive and making sure you've got all your security ducks in a row when you're building a product as a startup? You just can't. Like, we don't talk about the fact that Dropbox had like 17 breaches and we're just fine, right? Were those breaches necessary? Was that lack of security necessary to win in the marketplace? Because there were competitors there that are gone now that didn't have breaches, right? There were like super secure versions of Dropbox out there, and one of them pivoted into like space security. Now they're doing like commercial space security stuff. They pivoted into a different market. And it's nobody wants to say, maybe ignoring security gives me a competitive advantage as a business.
And it's not.
But you see people doing it, right?
But
like why would I do secure by design?
And
how do you do secure by design unless you use zero open source products? Because if you're gonna use open source anything, are you going to go do background checks on all of the people that contribute to that project? Are you going to do a full code review of that open source everything? Like, it's just impossible. And that I was just having a conversation last week with somebody about this, about the increasing reliance on open source and about how patient the new generation of attackers are with compromising open source, be it XEUtils. There's a couple other ones in the works out there right now. So yeah, it's just unrealistic.
And we've seen attacks.
It's a good ideal, but we need to be more realistic about the fact that it's probably unachievable.
That's interesting because for me, like, I think there's also the numbers about, especially looking at the volume of the Linux kernel being so many lines of open source, but corporations like the big, like Google, Microsoft now, surprisingly for this day and age, Amazon, Meta, others, there's a lot of corporations that are significant contributors to open source. So I know, Jackie, you're highlighting Trust, XEUtils, excellent example. There were even examples of those long con attempts to get insecure code into the Linux kernel. But I would also try and separate the idea of the design of the architecture versus backdoors or potential like one malicious commit. So I wouldn't throw them all away. I would just try to focus which part of this conversation are we having and where does it fit about the defenses we need to consider.
Yeah. I think part of it too there is how secure do you need to be, right? It's secure by design. Okay, does that mean I just need to make sure my lemonade stand is okay? Or is this like code going to be used for, I don't know, routing and switching on a large cloud network? Or so there's two sort of differences in there of like what do you actually need to get done on that sort of maturity scale.
But I think we're going to take let's bring this conversation about secure design into some news segment as well. Before I end this fun part of the conversation, I did want to take, as I think all of you know, we've been asking this year all of our guests describe Appsec in 3 words. And I wanted to give you all, since you're on the other side of the hosting, your guesting, if you will, to have a chance for answering this. So who would we could go in alphabetical order. Adrian, if you'd like to start, or if you'd like to defer and go last.
Supply chain pain.
Very apt. Jackie?
Not my problem.
I love it. John, you have anything for us?
I'm painting a picture here for folks, and it's sort of timely. Spring break madness.
And just to be fair, my answer is, as always, going to have to be Application Security Weekly. But before I send us into the outro for the news segment, since Adrian, you were talking about one of the things you mentioned, remind me of this quote from Dylan from the movie, from the show Severance, which no spoilers, but there is a part where he says, our message got out, we're all famous. And Dylan asks, all of us equally, or one of us is like the star? And we'll let our listeners figure out who might be the star in here. But with that, we're going to have to take a quick break, then return with news of the week. Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked about some of the worst approaches to AppSec and what we'd like to see improve. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm still here with John Kinsella. We convinced him to stick around this week, and Adrian Sanabria. Jackie had to run off, but we thank her for joining our very fun conversation. And we ended there about a great discussion about secure design, open source, and other aspects of the secure design discussion that even Adrian mentioned at the off air, that we're going to have to bring back for a segment, because there's definitely a lot of conversation to have there. There's also some more conversation you could have from Adrian himself. He will be running a panel cast with Fastly titled Security Without Speed Bumps, using WAF Simulator to transform DevSecOps workflows. Whew. Good luck getting that title out. I stumbled over that and can only read it once.
I have to say that every week also. Yeah.
Please join him. Please join him and applaud him for getting through that tongue twister on April 16th. Register at securityweekly.com/WAF. That's WAF. Old school WAF. It's coming back. And gentlemen, we've got a lot of news. And as always, I try to find a little bit of a theme to try to reference, like, why are we talking about this article? And I think in appreciation of what Jackie brought up near the end there, we're going to try to bring some secure design and perhaps some threat modeling into the discussion here. And the first one I'm going to kick off is, to my mind, only the second named vulnerability to get the nightmare in the moniker. So this is Ingress Nightmare, which is Wiz demonstrating $32 billion of value in their researchers, because their researchers, once again, have a pretty awesome blog post about a critical RCE, not a combination of words you like to hear, in a Ingress Nginx. So basically, this is just a way that attackers could get unauthenticated or pre-authenticated access to go and poke at essentially a reverse web proxy, and then trick that web proxy into executing some code of what they like. And this is because of the Nginx-T option. But I've been doing a lot of talking. That's how I wanted to set it up. The Wiz folks, always impressive work. I don't know, John, how you might have been reacting to this here, of whether the Kubernetes aspect itself and the security boundaries therein or lack thereof, or there's other lessons that we want to draw from this.
At least to me, I know this is exposed when it's used as the ingress controller in Kubernetes. But y'all have to realize how much Nginx is out there. It is sort of crazy how much this is used. I'll leave that at that. But yeah, I know this. There's a lot of Nginx out there. I think it was used for years as sort of like the cheap alternative, if I can use that phrase, to Apache HTTPD. And then it just kept going and going and going. So I think the write-up's great as usual from Wiz. Congrats also, guys, on your acquisition. Presumably it goes through. But yeah, it's hopefully, luckily, we don't see ones like this very often.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I analyze a vulnerability, when new vulnerabilities come out, one of the first things I do is I try and understand the attack surface and the attack path, and then the outcome of that attack. Here, the outcome is pretty bad. It's, apparently in most cases, you get access to the entire cluster if you pull this off. But what wasn't obvious to me just because I'm not a Kubernetes person, is how, the Wiz folks mentioned that they found some people who had this ingress controller exposed to the public internet. So most of these things are web services, right? But even if it's not exposed, and I understand like the role of this thing is to redirect messages or redirect requests to the correct pods, right? To the correct containers. But is it like blind SQL where you can kind of can you attack it without it being exposed to the public internet? Through an external. Like Log4j was like that. Like you could attack it even if you couldn't see it, right? Just as long as whatever input you sent an application made it to a Log4j library that was vulnerable somewhere, your exploit could work, right? So that's something I had a hard time figuring out here, just because I've not spent a lot of time with Kubernetes and I'm not very knowledgeable on it.
See, you don't have to use an ingress controller. You could just publish a port, same as with Docker, and have that exposed. Mm-hmm. You could use other ingress controllers beside this one, but this is one of those cases where probably in a lot of default configs out there, a lot of distributions, but also if you look at, this comes back to that whole blog post that you'll go find on like, hey, I need to set up an ingress controller, and they're all going to be doing this exact same thing. So There's a lot of it out there, yeah.
Yeah, and it points out, this is where the bug bounty folks are going to go out and start saying, oh, I found this SSRF at one point. How can I start to then weaponize, to use the fun word, this SSRF to demonstrate, here's how I'm chaining vulnerabilities. Here's how I'm using it to access something that is, quote unquote, not exposed to the internet, but is very one short hop away from that internet edge. There's another, speaking of secure design, I did also want to bring in another great article from Project Zero. This is from Ian Beer, who's writing an analysis of the NSO BlastPass iMessage exploit based on WebP. And this is a bit of a callback, actually, to another vulnerability that we covered way back in, I think, 2021 in episode 191 about forced entry. And the reason that appealed to me is that it's talking about the Apple's Blast Door. And the Blast Door was kind of their code name, their design name, if you will, of isolating the processes of having messages and what's being parsed and what's being presented within iMessage, because they know that sending images, for example, or PDFs, or these are user generated content that you're going to then parse and have a lot of potential problems. So this is a fun article that walks through some of the technical specifics of just, hey, we and Citizens Lab saw that there was a 0-day being exploited out in the wild against iMessage. What might it have been? And then the article walks through the Huffman decoding tables, how the exploit might have worked, or where it's targeting, but then figuring out what exactly was the mechanics? How did they get a payload in here with this WebP, basically, an alternative GIF, another way of representing an image? And it was really neat because it's just building up the parallels of here's what it looked like 4 years ago with another parsing of JBig2 image files, but how it was also a combination of a PDF parser and GIFs, in this case, what's called a PK pass file and the images. So it really boils down to some complex things that I don't think are that exciting to go into on the air. Please read the article. But what I'm trying to tease out is just why I like this, in the sense of here's how to reason about vulnerabilities. Here's some things that seem good in isolation, an image, but then you start to put some complex things together. Here's how an image can be embedded in another type of object. Here's how that object structure gets mucked about with, gets perturbed, doesn't get parsed well, and bam, you've got something that is now bypassing what is still a secure design of Blastdoor. So I now yield the floor, after my vulnerability, my security flaw filibuster, to see what my friends here will alliteratively react to.
Really briefly, what one of the things which tickled me about this article, this is a long post. There's a lot of meat in it. But one of the things which caught my attention is frequently on here, we'll be like, hey, person X did a great job on this blog post or this write-up. Like it's as if it's like just that one guy. And there's a section at the top of this where they sort of talk through the timeline of first like one person figured something out, then someone else did something. And I really love that they're sort of highlighting that collaboration, because a lot of what the research we're doing in security is we don't have all the answers by ourselves. So it's like maybe I find something, I send it up to Adrian, I'm like, hey, check this out. So I think it's sort of cool that they highlight that. And I don't want people to think that all this work is done by one person in a room.
And we love to see that too. The bunch of the articles we've seen in Portswigger, and we've seen, I think, a lot of other articles just saying, oh, this is how we're building on that Ruby SAML vulnerability. We built on this work from some others. So seeing the contributions and the acknowledgement and referencing is wonderful, especially as we get into the world of AI, just kind of erasing who the originators were of educational content, of interesting content, things like this. And that is going to be my segue into talking about some AI-related things. So there's one article called Backbench. Can LLMs generate secure and correct backends? And the idea is we want to benchmark what are all of these LLM assistants doing. It also reminds me that I don't know that we have a good benchmark even for humans writing code. So we can already say if LLMs are writing insecure code, yay, we've reached equality with humans, because humans can write insecure code too. That's the jokey, superficial way of talking about this. But it's something that I want to follow, because right now it looks like the secure code is actually pretty low success rate. So that doesn't bode well for our vibe coding friends either.
Yeah, but I mean, like I said earlier, who cares? Right? In the last segment, like building a successful startup, security issues, fine. Like I think we're going to see a lot of AI code. Kind of my take is, especially in startups, when you're building an MVP, like most of that's going to get tossed anyway. So why spend a ton of time on it, right? Like if there's a way to do it quicker, more efficiently, with more security vulnerabilities, and you're gonna use it to basically convince some early design partners and some investors and stuff like that, and then you're gonna trash it. That seems like an okay trade-off to me.
And there you go, the equities of, where's the money spent? How much of a liability is this creating? And I'll continue on that. I see John wanting to get in here with a comment.
Yeah. First on that, at least from my experience, a lot of that POC codes tend to stay around for 5 to 10 years. So there's that.
That's true.
What's interesting, back to what you're saying, Mike, you want to follow this. This is one of those things, by the nature of this existing, as some of these models do more and more training, are they going to see this when they're gathering new information to train on and just start becoming better? So in other words, is it going to be usable over several years?
And part of it also reminds me of, I have a background writing a DAST scanner. And one of the things I saw there is everybody said, well, how does this work against damn vulnerable web application? How does this work against this other, essentially a benchmark? So all of these scanners had to go out and craft basically ways to say, here's how we pass the benchmark.
Yep.
That was completely divorced from reality of how real people build real web applications. And it was like, oh, you did great on the benchmark, but then it failed here. So
Yep.
I can see the training. This is good to have, but it will be curious to see how much does this then lead to, we see fewer CVEs, or, I'm not sure what our proxy variable will be here. We're going to have to get Jackie back to help us out. But to be able to track, is our LLMs producing equivalent and or desirably better, meaning more secure code quickly, so that, by the way, to Adrian's point, these MVPs, these demonstrations, actually building something that delivers value in some way is done. Because admittedly, we're on Application Security Weekly, we're talking about Appsec first, but we're kind of lonely. That's why we need you to come join us, Adrian. Nobody cares about Appsec.
You know what? To sort of riff a little bit on what what we're all talking about, I wonder if there's going to be a group of folks out there, and maybe the whole industry goes this way, where they don't care about the security of what that AI code is generating. But instead, they go to more efforts to actually put a better firewall or IDS or some sort of thing in front of it. So it's like, hey, we know this stuff's insecure. Yeah. If anyone's out there is doing that, it'd be really interesting to hear. Give us a buzz.
I mean, you can take LLM out of the conversation and it all still applies, right?
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
MVP code is going to have a bunch of vulnerabilities in it, human generated stuff. That's why a WAF exists, right? It's we do have a bunch of. I think regardless of what's generating the code, mitigations are important. I think any kind of good vulnerability management program isn't entirely dependent on the vulnerability management. You have to have some broad mitigations in there that'll save your bacon in several different kinds of exploits are used. But mitigations and detections.
And that's why I want to pull in another article. This is from mindguard.ai, which might be the first time I've linked to a .ai domain for a news article. This is, admittedly, it's a little bit more of a corporate blog, but bear with me because the title is AI Security is Greater Than Model Testing. It's an Appsec problem. And Adrian, I think that really speaks to your point in the idea that this article is saying, why are we doing so much just testing on just jailbreaking, just prompt injection? And I referenced a research paper, a research blog post a couple weeks ago about maybe don't write that next jailbreak paper because what is the system that this AI is part of, this LLM? And we can just play ad libs. That's my Gen X reference. Sorry. We fill in the blank of this is an LLM. This is the new what was the cool? This is the new SOAP based API. This is the new XML based API. This is the new blah, blah, blah. But what is the system around it? And I think that's what this article is calling attention to. And I think it supports exactly what you were saying, Adrian. It's not an LLM in isolation. It's part of a system. What are you doing with that system?
Yeah, and I think there's close, when we say AI red teaming or adversarial prompting, whatever you want to call it, I think it's very... Because this technology is different from any others that we tended to build into applications in the past, I think QA and AI red teaming are very closely linked here. Because so the previous one we were looking at, Backbench, they're not just looking for security vulnerabilities; they're also looking for correct code. So the same thing applies here. And anywhere where you build in an LLM, just to determine if it's going to work correctly or not, you need some kind of prompt testing there. And if you're going to do prompt testing, if you're using, I'm going to blank on the name because I've got some fog from being under the weather. PromptFoo is a good example. If you're going to use something like PromptFoo to automate those tests, why wouldn't you also do the adversarial stuff, the prompt injection stuff, alongside your functional testing there. But yeah, in any model change, any fine tuning change, any system prompting change, and even from one day to the next, your output could potentially be different. Almost everything affects the output of an LLM.
And that's where I'd love to see, hopefully we do see a shift in, I use the shift word, a change in application security conversations from just everything software security to more appreciation of software quality in the spirit of, is this code correct? Because I do like the idea of, of writing correct code first, as opposed to, there's sort of, do you want to just write fast code? Is it the founder code? Is it this MVP code? There's a callback to the startup discussion. I do like correctness, but it takes longer. It's more pedantic. It's not necessarily delivering as it needs to be, but I like the idea of more correct code equals quality. Just by the way, equals also security. So I don't know where I'm going with that other than wishing. So if wishes were horses, Appsec would be out of business. I'm going to pivot to talking about a post-mortem now, changing from just talking about vulnerabilities and how and when they get introduced to actually another bit of maybe middleware, kind of in the spirit of the Nginx article that we kicked off with. This is from Next.js, a post-mortem on the Next.js middleware bypass. And I like it because I want to just celebrate transparency, give them props for explaining the timeline, what happened, showing what the miscommunications were. I think there's also a little bit of relationship to Adrian's point about code correctness or who's writing this. Is it LLM or humans? Because part of the documentation around next.js said, and I'm also quoting from this article, we do not recommend middleware to be the sole method of protecting routes in your application. And the big problem here was that if you were just using Next.js to route, to do cookie checks, is this person authenticated, and then you didn't have your API doing server-side full-on validation of that cookie, you were possibly being exposed to complete authentication bypass, which is kind of like, how is this going to be compromised? That Adrian was asking about the Ingress Nginx. But part of this also speaks to me as how, when you have a secure design, secure defaults, do you have an API that can be used or perhaps misused? But how then do you tell developers or tell an LLM, please don't make mistakes. Please don't use it in this one way, because doing that would be insecure. And just asking seems like it's not a very good security barrier, security boundary. So my prompt injection to my co-host is, how do you do this? And this is because I wanted to ask the question because I don't have a good answer. That's the secret. We're stretching. We're trying.
Yeah, it took me a second here to realize that middleware is an uppercase M middleware.
Oh, yeah.
And not being used as a generic term here. So that changes how you read it.
Well, and there's another great phrase from the article about the problem, the vulnerability would become more consequential if you were using middleware to optimistically verify a user's authentication state by checking cookies. And that's just a lovely phrase I thought in there, which it sounds a little bit jokingly, but I do like overall the article. But maybe we can shift from that article about things are tough because things are tough. That's a little too generic. Secure APIs are hard to design because you want to figure out how do you encourage good behaviors and how do you discourage or make it very hard to do the insecure choices. And of course, a classic example is React's dangerously set inner HTML. But you can also do dangerous things, or you can have secure designs, but then it becomes dangerous because of humans. And here, I'm going to shift to another fun article. And the headline says everything. The Trump administration accidentally texted me its war plans. And this is using Signal, for those of you who aren't already aware of this. Signal, very secure. It's why you can use public Wi-Fi. For example, it's strong end-to-end encryption in transit. You could say my friend used Signal over public Wi-Fi and all I got was this PCAP of encrypted traffic. So good luck. And right. Signal, of course, is already implementing post-quantum cryptography, quantum safe cryptography, whatever the fancy word is to use these days, because they care more about that threat model. It's easier for them to do this. But the subtext of this problem here, I think, is better called out in a 404 Media article that I know that you had a particular fondness for, Adrian. So I'll let you introduce this.
Yeah, sure. So this is, it's you can have the best plans, the best tools, but technology has to be usable, so there's always enough room to screw it up, if humans don't understand how to do good Appsec. So yeah, the title of the 404 article is When Your Threat Model is Being a Moron. And 404 definitely, they have their own flavor of things. And that is very on brand for 404 Media. But it is very much, I think this really highlights the importance of accounting for having humans using your systems, right? And taking into account the occasional moron or people who just don't know what they're doing. Like, it doesn't have to be, we don't have to throw on negative terms when talking about it in general like this, but But yeah, one of the phrases that really irritates me is human is the weakest link, right?
Thank you.
And I often respond to that with the admins, the security folks that don't, or IT folks that don't plan for humans using their systems are the weakest link, because we know they're going to make mistakes. We know they're going to do dumb stuff. And in this case, I think they had a better process for this, and they just ignored that process. So there was actually some story that came out like a week before this around I think DoD sent out something about not using Signal for this kind of stuff, and it almost feels like these individuals were like, we're going to do it anyway because we're that's just who we are.
Indeed. And there's on the serious note, there's a great article. I have to go back and find it again from Microsoft Research about ceremonies. And the idea of a ceremony is that you're designing a protocol, but rather than just protocol being consisting of systems and networks, you have systems, networks, and humans. And so humans are part of what you're designing, and meaning it's talking a little bit about user experience, but it's setting up what do we expect the human actions to be. Are they reasonable? Do we consider them? And part of Signal has I would argue, a pretty strong UX. It has fixed a lot of the problems of the old classic "Why Johnny Can't Encrypt" from the 90s, late 90s, about PGP. And let's have a ceremony of keys and sharing keys and figuring out, do I trust this? Do a lot of people trust this? Blah, blah, blah.
There used to be export restrictions.
But there used to be, absolutely. And we used to have people who would tattoo the Perl implementation of RSA encryption on their bodies as signs of protest, which I don't know if they're going to have to get post-quantum crypto tattoos now or cover that up. Who knows?
Might run out of space.
Run out of space.
I just have to, before we move on, I was reading this article the 404 one as we went through here. And just a single quote of a sentence from this. When doing threat modeling from here on out, it is now unfortunately important to consider the question, am I a moron? I think leave the presidential or the politics out of it, but just
I think everyone can relate to that. We've all been morons.
Here.
Yeah.
Yes. It points out, I appreciate...
Just not with national security and war plans.
No, and the distinction here is also negligence is the right word to bring up here. Because as thankfully Adrian pointed out, this is not a leap immediately to humans are the weakest link. I hate that cliche. This is not about blaming the user. This is users made deliberate choices to be negligent about what they're doing. And as a small aside, the Next.js postmortem is a good example of here's what went wrong, here's the timeline, etc. All the postmortem we've seen so far about Signalgate has been completely the opposite. Not even blaming the user, blaming the person who was added, blaming the journalist who was added to this, and getting into the semantics of what is a war plan versus not a war plan versus what did you actually talk about, what did you reveal. So yeah, a study in contrasts. But we're low on time, and I want to maybe try to end on something positive. I have two articles that I threw into the show notes with an FYI. One is about Rust getting a new language specification, or work towards a language specification. And there's another one called Paged Out, which is new to me. It's on its 6th issue of some technical one-page articles on cybersecurity and IT topics, which I thought was a really great format. And I also wanted to highlight them because they're using art in there that is art created by humans and attributed to humans. So thank you for keeping humans and human art alive in the world of LLMs and Gen AI. So those are the ones that I wanted to end with. Adrian, not sure if you wanted to give some final thoughts on either one of those or something else.
It's beautiful. It is delightful to scroll through. And it's, I kind of miss these. It's really cool that they do this. Thinkst has something they put out once every 6 months, Thinkscapes, which is also like a similar length. Like it's usually something around 80 pages, and it's like a roll up of all the stuff you missed if you didn't go to any conferences. They try and analyze all the stuff going on, all the papers, all the talks at conferences. And it has a similar feel to this. It's not nearly as in depth. This is a very different thing. It's people are submitting art and articles for this. But it's very cool. It's all over the place. There's hardware hacking stuff in here. There's code. There's all sorts of different things.
Yeah, great bite-sized articles just to enrich your knowledge, read about something new. And John, love to let you. We haven't heard from you in a while over the week, so love to have you help us close out the show.
I know I've been running around the world and sometimes doing interesting things. What caught my attention in here is they've got, at least I downloaded an episode of Paged Out just to browse through and see what this thing was about. And towards the beginning of it, there's an advertisement from good old Frac. So Frac's 40th anniversary is coming up, and they're doing a call for papers for Frac 40. So actually, it can't be Frac 40. It's got to be a different number, but still sort of incredible. But yeah.
Yeah, so if you like some ASCII art, go check out some old school Frac. And with that, read through some of those pages, have some fun, and do keep an eye out for Adrian, where he'll be, of course, and Jackie on Enterprise Security Weekly, his webcast on April 16th. And of course, come say hi to all of us at B-Sides SF at the end of April. I want to say thank you to Adrian. Thank you to John. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Please remember to subscribe, check out the show notes, share us on the socials. And speaking of humans making art, check out Edgepoint by Sung. We'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly.